All right, so today, class, we're going to be covering Canada today. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so some of our first essential questions are: how is Canada's government similar to the United States? What is one way that the government is different? So as we're going through the presentation, I want you guys to think about that. How is Canada's government similar to the US, our government? And in which ways is the government different? And more specifically, be able to explain one way that their government is different from ours. All right, so just to kind of start it off, the United States, in the United States, we have a democracy. Our democracy has three branches of government. We have the executive branch of government, which is controlled or pretty much run, or the highest power in the executive is the president. You have a vice president, and you have the presidential cabinet. Those are people that he kind of chooses to assist him on like are dealing with different parts of the government. The next branch we have is a legislative branch, and our legislative branch is made up of the Congress, and which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the Senate is the senators. You have 2 senators per each state, so therefore there's 100 senators. In the House of Representatives, each region within an area chooses a representative. So there are way more members of the House of Representatives than there are as it pertains to senators. And then you have the last and final branch, which is the judicial branch. And the judicial branch is the branch of government that reviews if all of the laws are constitutional. And they have the authority to strike down a law that's unconstitutional. So let's jump in and look at Canada's government. So Canada's government is controlled, well, just to start it off, Canada has a democratic government, and a democracy is a type of government where people elect the people that they want to represent them within government. So the head of Canada's government is the prime minister, and their prime minister is very similar to our US president. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. So one little small differences between the prime minister and our president: their prime minister oversees their parliament. All right, so Canada has a parliament, and what a parliament is, it's a governing body. Those are the people that write and vote on the laws. And so that governing body called the parliament consists of 2 different groups. You have the House of Commons and you have the Senate. So the House of Commons, their members are elected by people. So people go in and select and vote for the people that represent within the House of Commons. The second legislative group is the Senate, and the Senate is selected by the prime minister. Our Senate is selected by the people, but here in Canada, or there in Canada, the Senate is selected by the prime minister. That's a small difference. All right, so let's look at Canada's provincial governments. That's provincial government. So Canada's provincial governments, there are 10 provincial governments. The provincial governments are led by people that are called premiers. The provincial governments are similar to our state governments. It's pretty much based on a regional thing, and it gives each region some authority to make laws that are good for what they have going on. All right, so you guys can go ahead and pause the video right now and do a check for understanding. We'll let your teacher do that. So the first question: how is Canada's government similar and different to the United States? You guys can go back and review our 3 branches of government in comparison to what you just learned about Canada. All right, so now that we're back, we're going to actually jump into Canada's regions and looking at Canada's regions. So Canada is broke down into what I see a few different regions. You have the Northern Territories, West Coast, Prairie Provinces, Central Canada, Atlantic. And so basically these regions are divided and basically, I'm sorry, the book states that there are 4 different regions, and I use that map, so I'm wrong. So the 4 different regions are the Eastern provinces, the Heartlands, the Western provinces, and the Canadian North. So Canada is big on regionalism, and regionalism is a strong connection to like where you live based on the region that you live in, and it promotes regional pride. So there are cultural differences in Canada between English speakers and French speaking Canadians, and these differences have led to problems, conflicts. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the Eastern Province. The Eastern Province lies on the most eastern part of Canada. It's more of a maritime region, meaning that it's near the sea. So of course, you know that you guys will have a lot of fishing and things like that. In Canada, they have a short growing season, so it's not necessarily good for farming because it's pretty cold. And most people in the province are descendants of, are immigrants of the British Isles. So they're English speakers over here. You have the Heartland. More than half of Canadians live in these provinces, so it's heavily populated. Quebec is this region's most urbanized city. Quebec is the leading manufacturing province. And so I have to once again correct myself. It's the country's most urbanized region. One of the major cities is Ontario's capital, which is known as Toronto. You guys should know Toronto. We guys were, I was speaking with 7th grade and we were talking about Drake being from Toronto. So hopefully you guys know of Toronto. Ottawa is Canada's national capital. That's in the Heartland. Also, you have the Western provinces. British Columbia is Canada's westernmost province and home of almost 4 million people. It has a lot of mountains. It's very rich in natural resources, including forest, salmon, and other valuable minerals. Nearly half of British Columbia's population live in or around the coastal city of Vancouver. Vancouver is one of Canada's more popular cities. And then last but not least, you have the Canadian North. That's northern Canada, which is extremely cold. It's an extremely cold area. The region called the Canadian North includes the Yukon Territory, Northwest Territory, and Nunavut. These places cover 1/3 of Canada. The physical geography of the Canadian North includes forest and tundra. So, check for understanding. What are some of the characteristics of each Canadian region? How many Canadian regions are there? If you could live in one of those Canadian regions, which region would it be? All right, so let's go ahead and jump into trade. So Canada's economy depends heavily on trade. Canada's leading trading partner is the United States. About 50% of their imported goods come from the United States. So imports are things that are brought into your country, So about 50 of the things brought into Canada comes from us, the United States. About 75% of Canada's exports, those are things that they send to other countries. So about 75% of Canada's exports, such as lumber, goes to us, the US, the United States. The US, in the past, the US has placed a few tariffs, and tariffs is kind of like a tax on things that are brought into our country. One of the things that we placed the tax on is Canada's lumber. We believe that Canadian companies were selling lumber super low to try to drive the price of our lumber down. So we placed a tariff on their lumber. Canada argued that tariffs were unfair and that basically the United States should lift the tariffs. You guys can do a little research on your own to see how that political play went, because our book was written years ago. So those tabs have been changed. You would just have to research that on your own. All right. So a few years back in Canada, some of the cows that the Canadians sent to the US had a disease called mad cow disease. And so there were people that was getting sick and infected from those cows that had mad cow disease. So we banned cattle from Canada for a small moment. All right, so based on what I just taught you, what are some of the goods that are exported from Canada? All right, you guys can discuss that over with your teacher or write that in your journal. So that's the end of our presentation for today. Use this to complete your assignment. Have a good day. Thank you.